Like what you see here? Then be sure to subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8, a channel devoted to the history of college football. New videos drop twice a week. Click the card in the upper right corner or the link in the description to subscribe now. And now, on with our feature presentation.
Remember this past season when Aaron Judge was going for his coveted American League record and was looking to hit 62 home runs, which many consider to be the true home run record for most home runs in a single season, since everything above Roger Maris and his total of 61 has an asterisk next to it in the eyes of some? Well, ESPN received a ton, and I truly mean a ton of criticism for how they handled the chase. In particular, the fact that they would cut away and show the chase during other sporting events. I'm talking about live look-ins during college football games, even though if you truly cared about the chase that much, you just watch that instead of the game. I'm talking about awkward split screens and really small split screens where the game that everyone cared about was minimized just to find out whether Judge would or wouldn't break the record and knock one out of the park. It got to a somewhat ridiculous point, and I think most college football fans would agree with that statement. Having said that, ESPN was far from the first network to prioritize a record chase and the possibility of seeing the record unfold over an actual game. Because roughly a quarter century before that, the same thing happened with Fox, involving a game in this series right here at Milwaukee County Stadium between the Milwaukee Brewers and the Cincinnati Reds. Yes, the particular games that you're seeing highlights of right now were on other networks besides Fox, but the Saturday game was not, as it was going to be televised by Fox. And there was a ton on the line in this series, as this series had absolutely massive playoff implications in the National League. And yet, Fox thought that people didn't care about that, and instead, that people just wanted to see a home run chase. Let's just say that Fox thought very poorly, and there was so much outrage over this that Fox was eventually forced and pressured to change its mind and reverse course. It's a bizarre situation that we're going to take a deep dive into today, because this is the strangest controversy involving Fox and the 1999 Major League Baseball season. Before I talk about the actual controversy in question, we need some context to understand the importance of the series at hand. Entering October, there were 3 games to go in the 1999 season, and with the season drawing to a close, even though the playoff picture was sorting itself out in the National League, there was still a ton to determine. We knew that the Atlanta Braves were winning the NL East and were claiming the number 1 seed. We knew that the Arizona Diamondbacks, in just their second season, were winning the NL West and were claiming the number 2 seed. But for this team right here, their playoff fate was up in the air, because the Cincinnati Reds were having an amazing season, sitting at 95-64, and tied with the Houston Astros atop the NL Central. Thanks to a great offense that scored 849 runs, which was the 3rd most in the National League, and came out to 5.4 runs per game, and a very good pitching staff that allowed just 691 runs, which was the 4th fewest in the National League, and in all of baseball for that matter, and came out to just 4.3 runs per game, the Reds found themselves in a position to do something that they hadn't done since 1995, and had done just twice since the start of the 1980s: make it to the playoffs. Not many people saw this coming, especially after they were just 77-85 the previous year and finished 25 games out of first. But this year, thanks to the great play of guys like Scott Williamson, the reliever who won NL Rookie of the Year, left fielder Greg Vaughn, who hit 45 home runs and was 3rd in the NL in that category, and the great but aggressive base running of guys like Pokey Reese and Mike Cameron, who each stole 38 bases, the Reds were absolutely crushing it on the field, and they were a pleasant surprise. However, the job was not done for Cincinnati. Not in the slightest bit. Because despite their great 159 games to start the season, they still had 3 to go, and were not only tied with the Houston Astros for the lead in the NL Central, but were just 2 games up on the New York Mets for the lone wildcard spot, if, for some reason, the Reds couldn't win the division. Cincinnati did not have any room to slip up. If they did, then this amazing season of theirs would be squandered. With just 3 games to go, they could either win the division, be a wild card, or miss the playoffs. The drama playing out with the Reds and the NL Central was without a doubt the craziest playoff drama of the end of the 1999 season. And for their final series of the season, they had to take on the Milwaukee Brewers, a team that was 72-86, was well out of the playoff picture, had the 3rd worst pitching staff in the National League, and was one of the worst teams in the entire NL. Take care of business, and you've got a playoff spot. This was the marquee series that the Reds had to take advantage of. No questions asked. So you would think that if you were living in Wisconsin, considering the fact that Fox regionally televised games on Saturdays, you would think that you were going to get this game, right? I mean, you had your home state team, the Milwaukee Brewers, facing a team playing for the playoffs, so the game had massive implications. On paper, there's no reason why if you were in Milwaukee and Madison and anywhere else in Wisconsin that you wouldn't be able to watch this game on Fox on Saturday, October 2nd. Again, the footage you're watching is from other games in that series. Same series, but not the Fox game. However, that's where you'd be wrong, because Fox assigned the games to each of their affiliates and decided, for some inexplicable reason, not to send over the Brewers-Reds game to the affiliate in Madison, WMSN, even though that game had local ties, and even though that game had massive playoff implications, which seems like a double whammy in all the best ways. Instead, they decided to assign a game between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Chicago Cubs. Now on paper, this didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, right? The Cardinals and Cubs, let's call it for what it is, were both terrible, as St. Louis was 74-84, while Chicago was last in the NL Central, occupying the cellar of the division with a 65-94 record. The only thing that Chicago was fighting for was trying to avoid finishing with the worst record in baseball, as they were just 2 games ahead of the Florida Marlins, the Minnesota Twins, and the Kansas City Royals for the wooden spoon. The Cards and Cubs were a combined 50.5 games back of first place in the division that the Reds were leading. And it should go without saying, but the Cardinals and Cubs, with 3 games to go, were both mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, unless a couple of meteor strikes hit the surrounding cities of the division and left these 2 Midwestern cities unscathed. On paper, this seems like if, in the NFL, the CBS affiliate in New York decided in Week 18 to not televise the game between the Jets and the Bills, even though the Jets needed to win in order to make the playoffs, and instead decided to televise the game between the Steelers and the Ravens at the same time, even though both of those teams were out of the playoff picture and had nothing to play for. So, why did they do this? Well, that's because if you were watching the Cardinals or Cubs by this point, odds are you weren't watching because of the teams themselves. They were both lost causes. Rather, you were watching for the 2 players that you've been watching this whole time: St. Louis Cardinals slugger Mark McGwire and Chicago Cubs slugger Sammy Sosa. The previous year, in 1998, McGwire and Sosa embarked on the greatest home run chase of all time, as by the end of the season, Sosa had 66 home runs, which was the 2nd most in Major League Baseball history at the time, but was not enough, as Mark McGwire had 70. If you were a baseball fan, you were absolutely enthralled by what was happening with those 2 men in 1998. And in 1999, both McGwire and Sosa were picking up right where they left off. Through the month of September, McGwire was leading the National League with a whopping 63 home runs, and Sosa was right behind him with 62. Was it the record-breaking summer that they had in 1998? No, but it was an incredibly worthy sequel where both men did nothing but hit long balls. And Fox thought that the Madison affiliate would rather watch that home run chase and watch the battle between the Cardinals and the Cubs than they would watch the hometown Brewers play the Reds. Now, there are a few key flaws with this logic. Number one, as cool as this chase was, and trust me, it was very cool, this wasn't to set any sort of record. McGwire and Sosa, with 3 games left, were still well short of breaking any sort of record. No one was touching 70 or anything like that. This was going to be a season record, and was going to be one of the top totals of all time, but it wasn't going to be the all-time record, so it kind of loses its luster. It's almost like if you watch a person dive off the diving board, and they do a triple flip. That's super cool. Then their next time up, they do a double flip. Yeah, it's still super cool and impressive, but it loses its luster since they did a triple flip last time. Number 2, the chase involved these 2 individual players. How often are they at the plate? 4 times? Maybe 5 times over the course of a 3-hour game? That means that you've got an audience that is enthralled during the at-bats when they're up, so maybe for 10 whole minutes of the entire game. And then, for the other 3 hours, they're bored out of their minds and are just waiting for what comes next. And when you combine that with the fact that both of these teams were terrible, and the other option was a game that the average person would care about for the whole 3 hours, and not just for the brief moments that McGwire and Sosa were at bat, yeah, you can understand why the Fox affiliate in Madison, WMSN, was absolutely livid about this, and why they hated this decision. Ignoring a playoff race, where a local team is the opponent and has a chance to play spoiler, for a lesser version of the home run race between 2 teams that have nothing to play for, seemed like a bad idea. And as John Noonan, the programming director for WMSN, Channel 47, said on this, "We told them we want to carry the Brewers game." This was especially true since they were operating under the belief all along, and understandably so, that they were going to get their home state team, since there was no reason not to. And then, Fox changed it at the last second. However, in a surprising twist of fate, the pressure, the protesting, and the outrage by WMSN and others worked, because at the last minute, the day before the game was set to air, Fox decided to change its mind. Noonan and company were able to convince the parent company that in Madison, which is just 75 miles away from Milwaukee, so they're a secondary market of sorts, that there was way more interest for the Brewers-Reds game than there was for a meaningless Cardinals-Cubs game, where the only thing of any note was the home run chase that won't set any sort of records. Whatever Noonan did, and whatever Noonan said, clearly worked, and Fox catered to the demands of WMSN, airing the Brewers-Reds game to decide the playoff picture in the NL Central and in the wildcard hunt. For the record, the Reds would wind up losing this game 10-6, which you're actually seeing highlights of right now, although they would force a 1-game playoff with the New York Mets for the final wildcard spot, which they would also lose, missing the playoffs despite an otherwise incredible month of September, where they went 19-9 and put themselves in an amazing position. As for the home run chase, McGwire had 65 and Sosa had 63, with neither coming close to 70. So I think in terms of significance and whatnot, Fox made the right decision to change its mind, and WMSN made the right decision to protest and to listen to its viewers. So at the end of the day, if there's a conflict between a team and a player, and said player isn't even fighting for an all-time record, or is doing anything historic like retiring afterwards, always pick the team, especially if the team in question is local and is fighting for a playoff spot. Because let's just say that when the parent company Fox initially made the decision to not show the playoff hunt involving the Cincinnati Reds, it had the local affiliate in Wisconsin seeing red.
Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.